So, speaking of the shift towards a more online market, where did the idea for Click and Store really come from? As you guys moved on from traditional marketing means.
Well, it actually began a number of years before that. Maybe it was maybe 10 years prior to that. In I'll say our prior lives in the development and operation of self-storage facilities. I mentioned earlier that call centers came in about 2000, 2001. A number of the REITs started rolling them out. And then you started seeing third-party call centers roll out of that as well. And during that time, when we utilized the call center, we thought, wow, we ought to be able to rent these units online. I mean, not online, excuse me, on via the phone. We certainly had somebody sitting there in front of a computer who could fill in all the information and could give them a gate code if you had the codes there handy. Again, this predates a lot of current technology, but one of the things that was certainly challenging was how do they get a lock, how do they get through the gates and so forth. So when we were renting through the call centers, we would have we would have our operators, our managers at each location, put together a little welcoming bag. It would have a lock in it. It would have maybe a little welcome letter, bottle of water, maybe even a copy of the lease, and we would place that in very select units. And so when you called the call center, they knew which units those were. They could give you that number of that particular unit. They could give you an access code. You could then obviously provide all your information to that person over the phone, and and even at that time start making payments over the phone as well. So they would drive in, they would get into the facility, go get their lock, could move in 24/7. So we were sort of surprised that 10 years had passed, um, and that it really hadn't developed in the online world yet. And so simply one of the first things we knew we needed to get to was a an online rental. So when somebody shows up at that facility at 10 after 5 and the manager left at 5, or on a weekend, maybe when they're closed, that there was an opportunity for that.
And at the time, I started to do a lot of traveling for development around the country. We were seeing that the airline industry were doing things more online from your desktop at home or kiosks at the airport. But the opportunity was not to have to stand in long lines or have to go uh, to meet up with the airline agent before getting on the airplane. So we thought that would be a really cool thing to have in the self storage industry. To Brian's point, you show up after hours or on a day when you're closed. Some people do close on certain days, and still be able to capture those rentals. Further, people coming in from out of town, if they've done a search, say for a section of the town they're moving to, then certain self storage facilities would pop up, and they would be able to start to get an idea where they wanted to stay, which then led us to that next step of Click and Store, of how do we integrate that into the system.
So, would you say then that Click and Store was more of a response of what you guys saw was missing in the self storage industry, or more of a natural progression for where self storage needed to go?
I guess I would say sort of a combination of both. Um, we saw the parallel to other industries, like Larry said, where you could get a ticket to an airline online. You could move into a or get a reservation at least for a hotel room online, pay for it, and so that's certainly what inspired us. Um,
Yeah, and then so that's perfect from a desktop moving in from coming from another city. So now because otherwise those people would not have access to your yellow page ad, right? Being in another state, let's say, or even another town. And so now to switch over to the mobile website part that we obviously already had in place now, it was a pretty easy transition for us to take that that click and store concept, the ability to be able to choose a unit and rent and get a gate code unit number and do a move in without having to interface with a manager, it just made it much more easy, much more convenient for the customer. We're always trying to give them reasons to continue moving forward, to move in,
Hmm.
not reasons to go look down the road at the competitors and do a price shop. We were really serving a convenience at that point, as opposed to allowing them to or encouraging them to go down the street and look at other competitors.
Yeah, and one more thing on the mobile side of things is, to us, we were developing a kiosk in a pocket, as we called it. There were kiosks out in the industry at the time, and they still exist. They're doing well. But again, parallel to the airline industry, there's still kiosks there that serve a purpose. But there, there's certainly a lot of folks out there that are utilizing their phone just as well. So we certainly recognize that folks were used to moving in a form or fashion without any human interaction. So this was just another extension of that.
Right. And when it was new, when people would come up to the storage facility and there would be a sign saying it was closed, we we utilized QR codes at that time. They were fairly new, and so that was pretty easy for someone to click on that, and it would help to get them to the starting point of walking them through the process.
Yeah, so we really help the operators implement this as well. Here's the recommendations for your signage. What should be on it? We had a QR code with certain language. You would also list their website address for those that just wanted to type it in, because even the QR codes, they were so new that you usually had to go out and get an app for it, and sort of deal with that aspect of it. That's certainly come a long way as well.
Regardless, we also had the URL up there to be able to just type that in if they weren't familiar with the QR concept, and again get them to the right place for our interface to be able to walk them stepwise through the process and be able to go do a move in less than 5 minutes.
So there was certainly a number of challenges that we had to overcome to roll out Click and Store. Um, there were APIs, which are basically the connections between different technologies out there,
Hmm.
um, but a lot of them didn't really play well with each other. And um, we also saw a number of other obstacles out there, such as the fact that all 50 states have 50 different leases. They tell you when and how you can uh, force somebody out of a unit if they're not paying, and late fees and all sorts of stuff. So we were over here thinking, how do we roll out something that puts somebody in a unit in 50 different states, dealing with 50 different leases at a time where there was very little e-sign capability, which was also an issue. Everybody said, "Oh, you've got to come in. You got to produce your driver's license, and you got to sign the lease, and all this paperwork." And we were like, "No, we've got to find a way around this." And so, um, I I was sitting in a sporting event around the time, and for those of you that remember getting an actual paper ticket, I was sitting there, but waiting for an event to start, and I flipped it around and I started looking at the back of it. And that ticket gave me a license to use a seat, to sit in a seat during a specific event or time period. It said on there that you will abide by all the terms and conditions of utilizing our facilities. And we can kick you out if you're doing anything improper. And at the end of it, you have to leave. You have to leave. You can't just sit there and wait for the next concert the next day or 2 days down the road. So I took that concept and approached a very well known leading attorney in the industry with the idea, and said, I would like to move people in under a license agreement. And at the time, he said, I've never heard of anybody in the industry suggest that, but I'll do the research and I'll get back to you, which he did. We became a client of his, And he said, not only is it valid in all 50 states, it's valid in all provinces within Canada. So very quickly, we not only had clients all across the United States utilizing Click and Store, but we had folks throughout Canada as well.
Let me jump
Um,
in. And so on that license agreement, we this was the genesis of where the lease came from. On the license agreement, it was such a blanket coverage for, as Brian just said, Canada and the United States. We didn't have to worry about individual state laws or country laws to get them to do the move in. That license agreement would say something to the effect of, you have the right to use this unit for a certain period of time. That was you until you come in and sign the actual lease that would have been written for that state. So that was the genesis of migrating to the leases. But again, it allowed us to capture the customer right away, get money in the bank right away, keep them from shopping immediately, and they could rely on that. And then within, say, 3 to 5 days, come into the office and sign the actual lease. But it
that
also
was
preserves some rights for the property owner as well, that said at the end of that time period, if you don't show up, then we have the right to do whatever it is they wanted to do in terms of either selling off the goods or some financial penalty to get the customer to come in and sign off on the lease.
Yeah, it basically said that the goods would be abandoned and could be immediately sold. It was, again, legal in all 50 states. But the point of that is that people always want to throw up barriers. Oh, well, this isn't going to work. I've got my own lease. Or I operate in 4 different states. How are you going to utilize this? How am I going to utilize this with 4 different state leases and so forth? We said, that's fine. Um, they're going to get a license to use this space, and like Larry said, there's a fixed time. Well, within 24 hours, 48 hours, 3 days, 5 days, whatever it might be, you have to go into the facility and you have to sign an actual lease. But in the meantime, what we're able to do with our technology, we were able to immediately give them a unit, give them a gate code or access code. We're able to take all their contact information, take payment, and when the manager came in the next morning, the money was in the bank, and we were able to provide a service to these customers, some of which may just happen to have gotten to a facility at 5:15 with a loaded up U-Haul, and didn't know what they were going to do next. So, man, we were able to really help some folks out.